Scott and Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having
Great to
us.
be here.
So, I would love to start off with hearing about how your branding journey has gotten you here. Talk a little bit about your past life in corporate and how you came to start Pragmatic Digital.
Sure. I actually started back in the trenches of a promotional marketing agency, otherwise known as Frankel, which was acquired by Publicis and eventually is now known today as Arc Worldwide. I spent 5 whole years there, which in agency terms is a lifetime. And during that time, that was back when account people were also strategists. I think it's become much more specialized over time. And so it was during that time I learned about being curious. I also worked for some incredible people who forced me to learn the business, not just the marketing side of it. So one of the mottos was we ride the bread trucks. So we literally would have to, depending on the account you worked on, have to go right along with sales calls for the people, things like that. One of the most infamous things was if you worked on the McDonald's team, you had to spend a day working at a McDonald's. And if you were lucky and you were good enough, maybe you could work the fry machine. And it gave us a respect for the entire process and operations and such as that. So that curiosity was started, and through over time, and actually during that time there was things where it was stats, and then it went to Keyline, and then the web was born, and then we learned how to do things off of PDFs. So throughout my entire career, there was always this curiosity of how do you do something better? How do you embrace technology? How do you continue to solve problems? And that was definitely at the heart of everything. And so throughout my career, I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to have, if I want to work hard enough, learn about the ways that we can do that. So I moved over from being an account person in strategist to becoming a content strategist, where then I could focus wholeheartedly on not just the business of things, but I could work on the problem solving of using content and being able to understand user experience and branding from a holistic perspective. But I do have those acumen roots, which has become quite handy at times, of not just running our business, but also being able to help our clients understand the dollars and cents of things. Because as I always say, we don't run a not-for-profit. We all run profit building businesses. And actually, even a not-for-profit has to make enough money to be sustainable. So it's okay if we have to take a moment and look at what's ROI, what things work at. And so that came into as I grew, and I even went on the corporate side of answering those questions. It came to a point where I wanted to use all of that knowledge, not just some of that knowledge that I gained over I don't want to say how many years because that will age me immediately, but those umpteen years of learning. And so that was where it's helpful because Scott has a complementary skill set to what I do, because I'm the words and the strategy and a bit of the business, while Scott brings a different piece to the organization.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I will age myself. So it was 20 plus years in Chicago ad agencies, both traditional and digital. And so, I cut my teeth really at a seminal point in kind of the shift over from traditional marketing to digital marketing. So I remember I had a very early on creative director that said, don't waste your time with the internet. It's a fad. Print's going to be here forever. And I am kind of a student of history, and I saw what happened to typesetters. I saw what happened to photographers when they didn't transition over to digital photography. So I knew that there was going to be something to it. I certainly didn't know it was going to become what it has become over the past 20 years. But I went to college at Columbia College, a graphic design degree. There were no web design classes at that time, so I was kind of doing ad hoc classes and teaching myself HTML 1.0. And, throughout my career, I've always had this entrepreneurial spirit where I wanted to learn as much as I could and try to bolster my skill set and then bring that to the organization I was working for. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, transitioned over to user experience, where I was basically leading all of the digital strategy, user experience strategy, understanding what our audience needs, talking to customers, talking to clients. And so all those things came in really handy. And then you fast forward another, where we are now, all those visual design things that I've been doing for the past 20 years have come in really handy with all of our marketing materials and being able to put together a website and all that other stuff. So in a very, very, very condensed way, that's our story.
Mm-hmm. And so now you are both married and you're working together. So how did you decide to come together and start your own business together?
So it was over some champagne. It actually happened. We formed our LLC on New Year's Eve 2017 at 10:36 p.m. Because that's when we started going to LegalZoom to get the documentation started. So we figured, if we're going to do it, let's make it a New Year's resolution. And this is actually the first resolution, at least in my life, that's actually stuck.
Yep.
But yeah, so it was really, we looked at it, we have complementary skill sets, we've got the business acumen, we've got the visual design acumen. And so it really got us to a point where, X amount of years into our career, we're like, well, we should be able to do this. We've been working for other people. And so we decided to strike out on our own. Right around that same time, Gary Vaynerchuk was talking a lot about voice and, how it's going to be the next big thing. And when someone like he talks, it's wise to at least pay attention. I started doing some research and I was like, this is exactly what I saw with smartphones. This is exactly what I saw with, quite frankly, the web. And so, we're like, all right, well, let's take our skill set in a more traditional sense from user experience content strategy, and let's apply it to this new emerging market.
So you've definitely niched down in terms of the services you provide. Are you also serving a very niche audience, or does your audience stem a little bit wider than a specific market?
I would say in some ways, the niche, it's a funny niche. And the only reason I say that is we do have this voice expertise that we bring forward. But I, as a content strategist, would be remiss to say it lives by itself. So there's always going to be that holistic moment. And part of this is, and I will blame my curiosity, where I sit there and say, well, if this is a problem as we're figuring out a voice experience, is this a problem in your other channels? And trying to make sure that we are extending into a new channel. Like if you, I think was that Heidi Culbertson just actually was quoted as saying something to the effect of, if you have an established brand, then your customers already have a recognized experience. And so when you are moving into voice, you're not creating a whole new experience. You're extending that known customer experience into a new channel. So that's a very specific way, like we know how to do that translation, which is helpful because we can look at it from the customer side as well as the business side. From a target audience perspective, I think we have a broader audience only because we have a broader target, but who that individual is a little bit more specific because it's someone who's willing to take an edge. To take the chance to go into an emerging bleeding edge technology that doesn't necessarily have all of the ROI stories that, say, other digital channels do have. Even if they are ROI stories, they may not be great stories, but they have them. We have a hard time right now telling numbers stories because it's so new. And so I think that's kind of one of the challenges of looking for CMOs or even operations people, because call center avoidance is a very easy mathematical equation that we can give when we talk about ROI. But the other aspect of it is from a marketing perspective, there are a lot of ways that this channel will help you from an SEO perspective, customer experience, and also just in general information awareness, all of those pieces. As you stake your claim, that's going to be something where you've been there and you learn how to make your mistakes now, so that when the mainstream adoption happens next year, you've got it figured out. And so the tolerance is, you've worked through them. And so you're just going to be able to be a little that much closer to, I don't ever want to say flawless, but you're going to be getting it right a lot more than not.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a lot more about the technical aspect of voice and content strategy and all those things. But first, you said some things that were really interesting to me about how, Susan, you were very early on in your career exposed to many different aspects of an agency and really delve deep into any one of your clients from beginning to end. And then, Scott, what I thought was also interesting, other than I'm also a Columbia grad, so that's fantastic, was that you saw this pattern of obsolete markets happening. And so you made a point to stay ahead of the trend. So I think the common theme I'm seeing is that both of you, rather than settling for like, this is my job title, this is my role, I'm going to try to fit into something, you had this entrepreneurial spirit very early on. Yep. So how do you continue to do that now that you are the everything of the business. How do you manage running the business, serving clients, but also maintaining your edge?
In my opinion, this has been the hardest but most rewarding thing I've ever done personally and professionally. I liken it as drinking from a fire hose. And so literally it's just a fire hose of information. One day you're doing new business, another day you're, setting up email, doing your Facebook ads, doing webinars. And so I feel like I have learned a tremendous amount in the past 9 months that I've been doing this full time. So that's kind of one way that at least I feel like I've kept my edge, is just constantly learning new things and finding people out there, Frank Kern and a bunch of other people that I can look at that are doing things successfully online, and seeing ways that I might be able to take some of their techniques and implement them. And then beyond that, we've been doing a lot of speaking. We've actually done a lot of meetups here in Chicago. We've presented 3 or 4 different times. And then we're also going to be doing a presentation at Voice Summit. And so I think, just kind of keeping that skill set fresh and being able to perform in front of an audience and actually share information and be able to read the room and, give more information if it's needed or move on and things like that. Like, those are all things that, at least for me, keep me fresh and on my toes, much like when I'm presenting to a client.
Yeah, I would say definitely the networking aspect. I mean, we do work together, and we're a team of 2 right now. So this is my only other colleague. So I found myself reaching out more. And a lot of the work I used to be able to do a lot more heads down and kind of isolate myself a little bit. I can't do that anymore. So it's a lot more networking. Is it Twitter? Is it LinkedIn? But it's also reaching out to other content strategists in the UX community, being part of that. But then I catch myself not getting too deep into either content strategy or voice, in the sense of that's where I get to kind of refill my well. And then going out and then talking to businesses, going to things like the American Marketing Association. I went to their Brand Smart. And then that's suddenly realizing, okay, the scale of what I know when I talk amongst those who already sold on voice is here. I have to realize that there's still these folks who are like, okay, there's this thing called voice. What is it? My CMO is telling me I have to figure it out. Can you explain it to me in 2 minutes? And that's been keeping me super honest and being able to explain it without getting complex.
Well, and that's a really interesting observation, that you guys are operating eons ahead of where the majority of marketers are. I know for me, it was less than a year ago when I asked a fellow book marketing person, like, what are you most interested in? What are you digging into right now? And she's like, voice first. That's all I'm looking at. And I'm like, what is that? And so I've learned a lot along the way, but I think that the majority of online marketing agencies, marketers, or small businesses aren't necessarily paying attention.
No. And some of it's because when, I always talk about having empathy for my user, but also empathy for when I worked in corporate, for my colleagues and all of that, because I had a client once who worked to a president, and they had shareholders, and he had a thing called the how come couch. And I'm not joking. And it would be like, hello, so how come when you invested in that particular channel, it only yielded X? And to know that that was how she was going to be held accountable made me have so much empathy then for, okay, then no, you're not going to have time if you hear this thing called voice, but you still have to make sure that you're delivering a certain level of share or a certain level of revenue or et cetera. I totally understand. It's not even fear. It's just being smart and strategic about keeping your job and also not having to sit on something called a how come couch. From that perspective, I think that that's something where other agencies and trying to help them. I just read about an article today where they were talking about the excitement of voice, and then it went into audio branding, and audio branding is an amazing. I could go for days in there. After there's a few people who I know who do it well. And it's interesting because you think you know audio branding, and then you see someone like a Colleen Fahey or Steve Keller talk about how they come up with all of their little, not even nuances, but just their approaches of how it's not even a mnemonic, because a mnemonic is about a memory, and we're looking at a present thing, and we're talking about evoking emotion, and then you're sort of blown away by all of the nuances of when it's done well, how much it can move someone. And that's kind of the amazing thing where you can kind of get sucked in. and so that's kind of, when we look at what agencies are looking at now, is that's just one layer.
Yep.
And there's so many more. Now, it is nice to know that at Con, people were, I think it was, there were a couple gold lions, I think Nike achieved through NBA events where they did use voice and things along those lines. And so there is a little bit of interactivity that's being covered off of, but like, again, not everyone's going to have Nike's budget or their R&D or their just, hey, go do it. It's amazing. It's breakthrough. Not everyone's going to be able to invest in that. So I think it's an understanding of how people will dip their toes in the water and then making them realize that the water's fine. Come on in.
Yep.
Okay. So I have questions. Let me think of where to start. Let's start about, so if someone is looking to dip their toe, let's first set up some definitions of terms of what is voice. And if someone is looking to dip their toe into voice, where would they start?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to conceptualize voice is it's really just an umbrella term for any interaction that allows you to use natural language or your own voice to control a computer. So it could be your Comcast remote, it could be the Alexa or Google Home, Siri on our smartphone, Google Assistant on smartphone. Those are all considered voice interactions. So it's really kind of this, ubiquitous umbrella term. But as far as where to get started, I think the place that makes the most sense is what kind of questions does your audience regularly have? So looking at your search volume, your internal search logs, call center logs, things like that. What are the questions that you as an organization are constantly answering? And then look at ways you can actually provide those answers on an Alexa device, on a Google Home device, because like Susan said earlier, like the idea of call center avoidance is a no-brainer. And if you can take 3 to 5% of the calls that come into a call center and have them answered by an Alexa device, your customer experience goes up. So your customers are really happy. They don't have to wait on hold for 25 minutes. And then you're decreasing costs so that your call center folks can actually handle the more difficult questions. And this is something that is across every industry. Everyone we talk to are like, yeah, there's always 15 to 20% of those calls that are literally the same question that come up time and time again. And so that's a really great place to start to look. And it's an efficiency play. So it makes the organization more efficient. You can shift resources and actually take that money and spend it elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it starts with the basics. Right now, artificial intelligence, all of those things. I'm not going to say parlor trick, but it isn't nearly as interactive as we want it to be. It's going to get there. The analogy I like to use is when I first started working on websites, I had to learn how to code so that I understood how hard it is to make something happen and how many lines of code it took to make a button blank. And we got pretty excited about being able to do stuff like that. We're a little bit farther ahead of button blinking, but when you think about what websites look like today and what GeoCities looked like before, that's, we're kind of in that infancy in a lot of experiences. So something as basic as being able to create your skills. So you're claiming your skill name, because think about all the times you didn't get the URL you wanted because someone else had gotten it. So this is an opportunity to claim that. But this is also an opportunity for you to start to get that information and lay down a foundation. Yep. And so this is foundational work right now. That then will begin to evolve, and then you can start to add in e-commerce or lead gen. And there are lead gen opportunities already. But again, we're dealing with the basics because the most important thing to do if you're dipping your toe in is keep it simple. Deliver, if you're going to have a promise of, I will give you the information on the most basic questions, then answer them. And that way, then you already start to build up that trust and the goodwill and they're not over-promising and they're delivering. I'm good with that. Then if you do get a little more complex and it's not perfect, there is a forgiveness because it's like, yeah, they did what they should. Comcast is a great example. First it was, I can change the channels with my voice. Now you can almost work and link into the IMDb, or you can check lottery numbers. You can do so much more than that. But originally, it's a remote control should change channels. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of also a good thing to look at, of start small that you can build on. And that's the neat thing about a voice experience, is that a lot of these, you can just keep expanding outward. It isn't just a matter of, okay, you only have these 6 pages, you're done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that you can, or, oh my gosh, we have to redo the whole architecture. That's a very, it's an easier thing because voice architecture is a lot wider than, say, a website. So it is a lot easier to just continue to scale in a sensical way. I mean, you always have to have a good strategy and all of those important things at the heart. But it's that proposition isn't necessarily you can do and versus the, oh, let's do a whole redesign.
Okay. So are you open to going through a couple of like hypothetical scenarios?
Sure.
Awesome. So a lot of our listeners are authors. And so obviously a lot of them have audiobooks. So if they are thinking about maximizing their voice potential, if they have, let's say, audiobooks available on Audible, which is an Amazon product. So if you have Alexas, all those connections, what are some ways they can improve the opportunity to capture more audiobook listeners? Or what are some things that they should be considering when creating content for their website, structuring their website, things like that?
Yeah, there's a really interesting use case that I haven't seen in the wild, but I saw people talking about it last year at Voice Summit. And it was actually this concept of interactive podcasts. And so you could basically do a choose your own adventure style story where the person at a certain point is asked what path they want to take. And it doesn't have to be that, that obvious, but you basically you pick the outcomes. So like you could start thinking of storytelling in an interactive fashion and having multiple plot lines even within an existing story. And I know that's something that Audible is also exploring, mostly because they're on that panel as well. So I think that's a really interesting thing that authors can start to look at. And it doesn't have to be as cheesy as, do you want to go down this path or that path? And, there's a spooky goblin here or whatever. But like you can look at ways to create more immersive storytelling experiences. Something that we were talking about a little bit ago was the idea of doing flash briefings for the authors.
Yeah. So I know that there was one of our software partners. They actually had started, before we started working with them, they actually had a lot of authors who were working with them. And the way that some of them were using it was in a daily snippet of either work or just some of those RSS feeds where you start with something and then you create and story starters and things along those lines. I think to build upon that, if you are an author who has more than one book and if someone likes your book, there are ways to either share a little bit or through a daily snippet or a character piece of information or something. If you have a franchise, there's ways that I think you would be able to use a flash briefing to just kind of share more layers that maybe character studies or plot thoughts or things like that you could just kind of share out there that might not be as interactive initially, but as you do move into, I think there are some skills that we're seeing that are going to be more interactive. You can start to add that in there as well and hear from your audience a little. Depending on how much you want to hear from your audience. I think that's definitely, I think that some book fans are very much like sports fans in that there's a lot of input sometimes, Monday morning quarterbacking when you get to a final product. But I think that there are some ways that you can kind of enrich and add layers to your stories or pieces like that. And I think that that's something that you can promote either through like your Twitter feeds or when someone, makes the purchase or in your descriptions about, you can hear more about this character or you can hear more about these pieces, depending on what the topic or stuff like that. Or even, here, let me tell you why I wrote this book, which, in certain places in Audible, they're trying to tell, this is why you need this book. This is a moment for you to give even more about, share more of the passion of like what inspired you to put pen to paper or, well, basically metaphorically, but be able to do those things and drive you to go there. And I think that will also help your audiences start to find more of your work, but also understand you even more.
Yeah.
So this seems like a way, so the authors would record the audio and it would live on their website or in a podcast feed or kind of link at the back of an ebook or something, right?
Yep.
Well, that, or you would create like a full-blown Alexa skill. And there's some easy ways to do some things. There's some custom ways to do some things, but like there's platforms like Witlingo that exist where you record the audio and upload it to their platform. And then when someone asks that question, it finds the right audio file and serves it up via Alexa. So you wouldn't even necessarily have to rely solely on someone going somewhere. You could say, Alexa, open whatever the name of the book is or the skill is, or your author's name, and then actually have that experience happen directly on Alexa. So I think that's probably the next iteration of where it will go. Mm-hmm. And there's certainly software tools that exist now to make that really easy for content creators.
Yeah. And the nice thing with the recording is, with like say the Witlingo product, is you can use your smartphone. Yeah. It doesn't have to be in a studio. Like we've kind of been able to borrow from YouTube's user-generated content feel of saying, if it's overly produced, not sure if that feels as genuine. So it's okay if you have the echo of you're not in a sound booth. So that also makes it easier and more accessible to letting more people use it.
Well, I really love the idea of, if we're talking to Google Home or Alexa, like where did J.K. Rowling come up with her idea for this world? To have J.K. Rowling respond in an audio would be so much more engaging and interesting than the robot talking to you with questions.
Yeah, and I think kind of beyond that, there's, what's your inspiration? How did you start writing? And there's all these questions that as a fan, maybe you're curious about. And with some authors, they're probably answering these questions anyways already in audio. So it could be just a matter of taking some of those audio pieces that already exist that reporters are asking you and create a skill that then your fans can actually almost virtually interview you. So, and I think that will work in movies and sports and, across every industry. But I think that's also a really great way of this technology to make it almost like a simulated conversation. Yep. We will get there at some point in the next few years where it will be a real conversation. But right now it's mostly audio files playing back or the Alexa voice, like you said. So I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting ways we'll be able to use voice technology to better engage with our audiences and create even deeper engagements.
Well, so I like this idea that in theory we would have like a 10 questions on the website that they would click and it would either do an audio and then maybe a transcript, but that we could, using Witlingo or another service, we could actually train Alexa or maybe Google Home too, to answer these questions so that people can just talk as opposed to going to the website and clicking through.
Yeah, it's kind of like when people always ask if you could have dinner with someone or sit on a park bench with someone. You get to have your authors there. I mean, yes, the range of questions will be, if someone has an oddball question, probably have to figure out a nice, polite answer for that. Of like, no one's ever asked me that. I'm not sure I have one. But I think there's ways that you can create that interactivity that feels one-on-one. I suppose there's a whole host of like unintended consequences of people feeling like they know you better than they do or things along those lines. But I think it's also an exciting way, if you're willing to share a bit of yourself, that you would be able to do that. And I think you could even do that with characters of like, is JK, it's helpful if it's already gone to a movie. And so then you can have the actual voice actors answer those questions. But is there a way of like, you can question Harry Potter, have an interview with him or elsewhere? I think it gets a little more dicey if there is no existing voice because you don't want to polarize people. But I think there's lots of ways that you might be able to, again, do more character development than you've ever been possible before.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting how I like how you're breaking it down, that the concept of voice is very simple. It's a voice interaction wherever it is, but that because the technology is growing so quickly and the amount of people with smart speakers is growing so quickly that it's just changing how it's manifesting. So like one of our thriller authors has a character called the Nowhere Man, and he has a 855 number, 855 to nowhere. And we have it set up so the audiobook narrator answers the phone and it's a voice recording it's lovely. It's fantastic. But I mean, this is like very basic. We started this 5 years ago and it's a very basic 855 number and we uploaded an audio file, but now it gets me turning about what other iterations we could do if people could tell Alexa to call the Nowhere Man. That seems really cool.
Or you could even just say open Nowhere Man or launch Nowhere Man and then just go straight to that. What's really interesting with voice is interactive phone lines and voice recordings. Those are kind of the heart and then the beginning of that, if you've ever worked on a phone tree, if you have ever worked on any of that type of automated handling, that is nuggets and some of the roots that not everyone's willing and happy to talk about, but those are some of the roots of what voice experiences are about.
Yep.
And what's nice though is those are very nested and less interactive, where you have to listen way more. The neat thing with speakers is that, like, as I said, that's a flatter conversation. So you don't have to always necessarily ask A to get to menu B. We are able to kind of split things out farther so that you can ask A, Q, B, what have you, because let's face it, humans aren't linear conversationalists. I think I've probably demonstrated that several times already. So it gives you that natural feel that is different than, the press one and things like that. And that's what's exciting, is being able to kind of make that into a more natural feel. So that you don't need to be literate. You don't need to have understand how something works, because we know how to speak and know how to communicate. We can start to then experience, use voice technology.
Yeah, and I think the other really interesting thing to build on the Nowhere Man idea, you can actually push something to the Alexa device so it actually glows the ring. And then you actually could get a message from Nowhere Man. So you don't even have to call in or ask for it. It could just randomly show up, and then you say, what's my notifications? And then it actually plays this message from this character that you're already engaging with. So it actually becomes kind of a bi-directional conversation. So that could be kind of a fun additional layer that you could play with.
I'm ready. I like all of these. And if Amazon would only share the who bought what, right? Like we could, if someone purchased the book, that we could get a message to them and push it to their smart speaker. But that would require Amazon sharing data, and they usually don't like to do that.
Yeah,
No, they do
not. I would say what you would want to do is build it into the description of the book. Mm-hmm. And if it is like maybe a digital copy, actually have it in the digital copy as well, so that people know what the invocation phrase is. And then at least you have a higher chance of being people that actually bought the book that want to interact with the characters.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for that new marketing idea. I'm sure with it. So another scenario that I think we work with a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs who are looking at SEO, that they get most of their business through search engines. And it seems like now more people are either talking to Google via their phone or their smart speaker, and the SEO strategies are changing. So if someone is trying to optimize their site to generate more leads through voice and through voice search, what are some things that people should consider?
So there's a few aspects to voice search, and I'll go through a couple of them, but I think to answer your direct question, if you're trying to rank on a website for either certain phrases, terms, or whatever, we need to shift from keywords and thinking about our pages as keywords. And we need to actually start thinking of them in longer tail phrases, so what we call long tail search. And so it could be something, instead of just saying books, it could be, I'm looking for books with Nowhere Man in it, whatever the case might be, right? Because as we start talking naturally, we don't just blurt out keywords. We have questions, we have full phrases that we're asking for. So we need to start thinking about how people will ask for this information, and that's certainly something you need to account for, on page, and have content relevant to that. There's a stat that I saw in the past 6 months, only a third of all websites on the internet, so that's all web pages, are actually optimized for long tail. So that's a huge area of opportunity for small business to start outranking their competition just by going after the long tail phrases versus keywords. Keywords are expensive. It's going to be really hard to rank for it, especially if you have bigger competitors in the space. But the longer tail is a way that you can actually start to make some pretty big inroads, because they're focused on keywords. They're not actually focused on the long tail. I think beyond that, though, when we're talking about voice specifically and smart speakers like Alexa, there's a really interesting thing that happens. So when you ask a question to an Alexa device, let's say, you don't get a page with a bunch of blue links on it. It literally is, here's your answer. So Alexa's like, hey, I found the answer, and here it is. So we don't have the luxury of being a number 2 or 3 or 4 player. We have to shoot for being that position 0. Otherwise, we're actually not part of the conversation side. And so what's really important, and I don't know if you've seen our webinar or any of the graphics that we have specifically on this, But with Alexa, we know that there's 3 rings of information. There's the internal database where time, weather, traffic, whatever, it knows the answer, great, it moves on. There's this other ring that not a lot of people are talking about, and you don't see anyone in the SEO world talking about it. And the developers actually get it, but they're not necessarily putting the implications into how it works with SEO. But basically that second ring is the Alexa skill store. And so the way Amazon has their programming built, it will actually, Alexa will look out to the skill store and say, is there a skill that has this answer? Is this skill, which really is just a fancy word for app, is this skill credible? Are people using it? Are they coming back? If it's considered a credible source of information, it doesn't ever go out to the website. It just pulls that information from your skill. And so the really critical thing for people to understand is if that actually becomes kind of the de facto standard in how people get information, organic web traffic is going to start to dry up over the next 3 to 5 years. So your website will actually kind of drop in prominence. It'll still be there, but it'll be less important because people are using these smart speakers without a screen to get the information. So what we like to tell clients is it's not a matter of, well, this is going to completely replace your website. But if you're not part of the smart speaker equation and your competitors are, when organic traffic starts to dry up, you're going to lose those people from your ecosystem. So what you want to do is as website traffic starts to dwindle, you want people to still be going to you, and you want to have that credible source of information. Otherwise, they're just going to go to the competition.
So it's almost like you're becoming, and by using this app or skill, you're becoming an authority. So it's not necessarily like the voice is going to drive traffic to your website, but it is going to position you as an authority on this particular subject.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, you're already starting to see Tide, for instance, doing that, where they're answering a lot of questions around the idea of doing laundry and the quote unquote lifestyle of doing laundry. And it's a brilliant strategy when you look at it. Like, they're trying to be super helpful and they're trying to get a lot of people to use it. All it's going to take for them a year from now, 6 months from now, is to add e-commerce into it and go, hey, you had this question about Tide, here's the answer. And by the way, we're offering 50% off. Would you like to buy it? So once they get that pattern of people getting comfortable with using that skill, they can add in that shopping layer. And so it's really a brilliant business strategy, quite frankly. And it's really a model that I think a lot of brands, big and small, could actually borrow from.
Yeah. What I like about this too is that it's forcing brand, whether it's smaller businesses or bigger brands, to serve. Like, you can't, there's nothing, no one's going to search like best photographer in Chicago and you're trying to rank for that. They're going to ask specific questions, and it's up to you to create valuable content that serves. And it's something that all of us online entrepreneurs have been preaching for a really long time. And some people do it and some people don't. But I like that this is forcing even someone like Tide or other companies to help people frankly use any product, but hopefully they're going to buy their product because they are the trusted authority that has been helping them do their laundry and live the laundry lifestyle.
Right. Or get their things done. When you think about when you go to a website, you have a question in mind. Like, I don't think that many folks, I mean, in general, if there's a piece of information or you set out with a purpose, the beauty and the reason what voice first means is that instead of going to your computer first to do it, you're just going to ask that question. And how amazing is that? That then instead of you having to do the search, or are you a really good Googler? Like, some people this is basically allowing you to just use spoken word to figure it out, and the computer does the hard work. All of these algorithms will sort that out and get through it so that it's like, all right, here it is back, versus you going, okay, I click here and I go there. And so that's kind of amazing when you think about the implications of how much faster we can get our information. But it also is, all right, you want to own that answer. You want to be that person then, or that entity that delivers that piece of information. And credibility, it's similar to as SEO has always been a challenge of, we think it's these things because darn them, they don't ever tell us exactly. Those are important things, but we have some clues because we can look to, okay, what did SEO look at? Or even when I'm looking for skill rankings, I look and say, okay, Amazon, how do you do your product rankings? Can I look to that? And that was sort of how we stumbled out on to what the voice web is. And when that content isn't there, and it happens more often than not right now. That's when Siri's like, I don't have an answer, but here's what I found on the web. Like, she even admits at that moment, I can't find it in a voice pattern. And that's Siri saying that, which is, the interesting thing, that's not just Alexa. So that already is the tip off of where Siri looked first. And so as we get more voice content, that is going to be the implication of that. It's just going to be, as soon as I find my answer, I'm going to use it there. So you want to be upfront.
And it's really it's also the only way that a business can actually control the content that a smart speaker picks up. Like, if it's going out to the web, it could come from Wikipedia, it could come from your competitor, it could come from a host of places we don't know, and there's no way you can actually control that. So actually having a skill or an action on the Google platform with your information in it is truly the only way that you can actually control the narrative and provide that information in the way you want.
So in terms of keyword research or key phrase, long tail keyword research, if you have, like, say, a list of questions that you think your target audience may be searching for, is that a good research tool to just ask your smart speaker? And if she doesn't have an answer, that is maybe where you should start?
It's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
And right now there's no voice SEO tools. And so we're looking at, all right, so what exists now on the web? You can look at Reddit is a great place, like common questions that people have on various topics there. Quora is another great place to look for kind of questions and answers and what people are looking for and what information is valuable. But right now there's at least not announced a true SEO tool to actually see what user intent is in the voice platforms. But I think you're right. I think it's a matter of identifying what we think it is and then just start asking questions, or like ask Alexa about your business and see what it comes up with. And is that what you want your customers to find?
Yep.
And so, like Susan said, it's much like the early days of the web where, if you didn't buy your URL right away, someone in Russia or somewhere else bought it. It's the same kind of thing that we're talking about. So it's also protecting your brand image, protecting your IP and your name.
Yep. And I think the other important thing too is you can start. It's not bad to start from questions you think your audience is using, but then go back and check and make sure that they are asking those questions. With some of the tools we use, they actually have really great tracking so that you can see, okay, this answer is being served up a lot. Therefore, I know I'm answering that question. Like, that is answering a question that's being asked. I think Google had recently announced that they were going to start using FAQ pages, frequently asked question pages. That's a little frightening because in my experience, it's a bit jaded. Frequently asked questions happens to be that garbage dump of, all right, well, what are the 10 questions we think they're going to ask? And then it never gets looked at again. And so that's not the best content. I think what's interesting now is that frequently asked questions is not a dirty word when you're in the land of voice, provided you can start from a baseline, because it's always test and learn, is it not? Is going and then refining and putting that through there. One of the interesting things with one of the tools that we've seen is you can see what the invocations are or what language people are using. And it's not just full disclaimer, not assigned to any user, but it helps us see, oh wow, someone's asking about this thing and we don't have that info there. Well, let's give them that. Or, that's interesting they asked it that way and it's not mapping to the thing that it should be answering because, oh wow, we didn't connect those dots. Well, let's connect them. Okay, now we've helped another actual human be able to get to the information they need. And at the end of the day, isn't that what websites, digital marketing, all of it's about, is getting the information to someone who's asking for it.
And what tool are you using to track that?
So we have a couple. So Witlingo provides that information. There's also, Voice XP is another platform. There's several platforms out there that are set up. Those are easier platforms to use because they are structured already. So some of the heavy lifting from a development and even an experience design have been thought through by some really smart folks who I know that at Whitlingo they have a neuroscientist linguist who helps with all of that. There's a lot of good thinking that's already been put in there. So if you don't have a strong heavy UX background, or you haven't spent the past 18 months of your life touring all these voice conferences, someone's done some of that work for you.
Yeah, and the cool thing is you can actually, like Sue said, see the questions that are being asked. And if you haven't answered something, you can actually go, well, we should answer that. So like with our own voice skill, it's called voice facts. For whatever reason, people were asking voice facts for pizza. And so I don't know why. I had a lot of questions in the log about pizza. So I was like, all right, well, I'm a Chicagoan. I'll give my 2 cents on pizza. So I actually recorded an answer about Chicago-style pizza, and not, thick crust, not deep dish, just the thin crust stuff. And people love it because it's actually almost like an Easter egg.
I was going to say, our first Easter egg.
Yeah. But it was just because people kept asking for it. And I was like, well, I'm just going to give the people what they're asking for. So here you go.
Yeah. And I think the other part to that, and this is the double-edged sword. So what's great about these platforms is they're kind of, if people are familiar with, it's kind of like having WordPress for voice. But we also know that even with WordPress, you can have a bad site experience, because it matters not just how it's structured or how it's laid out, but also what's in there. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the part of it that's really important to note, is that it's also, you're only as good as the content you put in there. So you got to think about that, and how is that consistent with how you present yourself or your brand or your company, and how all of those things happen. Because while speaking is easy, a great voice experience is not. And that's one of the challenges that we kind of sometimes struggle with, of, oh, wow, this is super easy. And it's like, the easier a voice experience is, or the smoother it is, the chances are the longer it took to do, with the amount of testing and upfront research that was done. But that means we're doing our job.
Right. So I equate it kind of to doing like a really great email marketing funnel, where, you can write the emails and you may or may not feel like that's easy, but to have that experience where they get this email and they get this email, they click this, they get this other series of emails. And if they bypass these emails, that takes a lot of skill and testing, and it makes a huge difference when it comes to marketing.
Yeah, when it's done right, it's like, wow, it's like, this is amazing. And that's what you want, that's where we want the delight.
So I have another voice question, but first, so Chicago pizza, give me the two cents. Where are you going for your Chicago pizza, or where do you take the tourists?
South Side, born and raised. So for me, I grew up on Aurelio's. So it's the thin crust Chicago tavern style pizza. And I think that's as far as I went. I didn't say a specific brand on our skill, but grew up with the sweet sauce, and that's my answer.
There is an Aurelio's now on the north side, but
I remember really?
In Wrigleyville.
The last time when we were there, up until about 2 years ago, the one on Roosevelt was the newest one in Chicago. So,
yeah, I remember Aurelio's from my wife's family grew up in the south suburbs, and I remember getting Aurelio's. But I'm a deep dish person, so I love deep dish.
Yeah, we used to go to the one in Homewood every once in a while and get it out of the old oven, which I guess you could still do. So,
I love it. So just the last question, what are some taboos, missteps, things that people should avoid if they're diving into voice?
I'll go first, because I have a real
I know you have a very strong
quick thought on it. So I think the worst thing that we can do is think of voice as a 30-second or 60-second radio platform. Like our first inclination is, oh, well, it's just a bunch of audio stuff that's playing. So we used to do radio. Let's just do radio spots. And so even with, say, Spotify, Pandora, you're starting to see those platforms have ads in them. But I think there's a big difference in that with their freemium model, they've already trained their audience to know that every third song or whatever, you're going to get a commercial. So like Spotify ran a test about a month and a half ago where it was talking about a playlist. And it was like, get this playlist. All you have to do is say, play me this playlist or whatever. And it was literally a 30-second commercial with a little CTA that drove to another playlist. So there's this big obsession with trying to figure out the advertising aspect of it. And I'm sure the platforms are going to work that out. But I think the biggest thing that you need to do is understand your audience, understand what their needs are, and deliver on that first, and then let the other stuff kind of fall into place. But everyone I talk to in advertising, they immediately jump into, well, it's just like radio, so therefore it's this, and that's not the place. It's very interactive, and so we need to think beyond just a push message.
Yeah, I would agree. Voice technology today is not a soapbox for you to yell about your brand or even just let me, I was at, oh, this is terrible. I'm thinking about this Toby Keith song. It's like, I want to talk about me. Like, that's good voice experiences are not about a brand saying, let me tell you what I'm going to tell you that I think you need to know about me. Instead of, you think about when you meet a person and you go through about how you find out about them, it's that type of conversation. And it's more of that idea of situation. So it's, what does this user want to know? What is this person trying to do? What are those things? And try to answer those questions, and don't let your brand get in the way, because this is an opportunity for a brand to act itself, not necessarily tell itself. So it's not about, I'm using a friendly term, right? I'm using friendly words, and it's just, all right, if this is your brand persona, be that brand persona, which is kind of mind-blowing to know that voice and tone is really voice and tone. But that whole personality of, like, if your brand's a person versus it, just injecting oddly phrased things like that. And I think that's another important part, is making sure that if you can't read it when you're reading a script or even out loud, then chances are no one's going to want to listen to it. Or if it's a question, no one's going to get through that question. So it's important to make sure that you can speak it, and rehearsing with another person is not a bad thing. Role playing, actually, that's what they do at Amazon too, when working through new things, because it's a little bit cheaper. It's the fastest prototype ever. But more so than that, it brings it back down to, who is this for? This is for human. So let's make sure that humans can use it. I think those are the most important things. The other most taboo or thing to think about is voice isn't for every single task. If we've all been on the L and someone's talking to their doctor about how they have a contagious disease like strep throat, and we all are like, really? You're on your cell phone and you're doing this? That is a great example of, are there things that you're not going to want to say in a room? Or are there things that make more sense to, like, you know what, I think I want to text to that. Or I want to have a private conversation. Those are important things to think through. One of the other exciting examples that I like to point to is when Domino's first rolled out their very first app or skill on, like, you can order a pizza. It actually was harder to order that pizza using your voice than it was to go to the app and figure it out. Even if in reorder was easy, but if you were creating a whole new pizza, doing it on a voice skill it took, I don't even know, infinitely more times to do it. They've since fixed that and refined it, and that's okay. If you don't learn from your mistakes, then that's a problem, but it's okay to try and fix it. But I think it's important to just realize not every single thing is going to fit. And it's really hard when everyone's like, oh, voice is this new shiny disco ball and everyone needs it. Think about the use cases a bit, and then you'll find out if they will. And then finally, if you build it, they won't just come. Like, when we first launched websites back in the 90s and 2000s, we had to train people. The same applies now. Same with, is there an app for that? Okay, now we just kind of go and look to, you can figure it out. Same types of training has to happen, because this is still very new. And a year ago, a voice skill, everyone was sort of like, what's a voice skill? So we have to start training people. 2 years from now, probably won't have to. But that's a whole thing of making sure that you add it to your fiber and don't treat it like a silo. That it, if you're promoting something there, then you promote that as well, and it's part of your ecosystem.
Oh, that's so important. So on that note, if people do not want to navigate this on their own, where can they come to learn from you and work with you?
I would say the best place is to go to LinkedIn. We're both really active on LinkedIn. So I'm Scot with one T. My father decided that I should be named after the country and not follow protocol. But yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn all the time. She's on LinkedIn. Very active on Twitter as well. So those would be the easiest ways to get a hold of us. Otherwise, you can go to our website at pragmatic.digital to learn a little bit more about what we do.
Perfect. Well, you guys, thank you so much for clarifying and sharing and also getting the creative juices flowing today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for the opportunity.